A well-respected, much-loved algebra teacher is living out her dream, helping others. Until one day, she doesn't return home from work. The town is going crazy. Her loved ones go searching for her. Eventually, her body was found, half naked and completely brutalized in the woods, buried under a pile of leaves. This is the story of Colleen Ritzer. Colleen Ritzer was born May 13th, 1989. She was a Massachusetts native born in Lawrence. It was a good-sized town of around 89,000 people or so, give or take. Her family was a very close-knit group of people. Colleen grew up in a Christian household. Her parents were the absolute best parents anyone could ever ask for. Their names were Tom and Peggy, and they were very smart. They were caring, warm, loving. Colleen had so many people that loved her and so many people that looked up to her. Along with being a beloved school teacher, she also had two younger siblings that she loved so much, Laura and Dan. Now, everyone around Colleen knew that she was living her dream as a high school math teacher. As young as 3 years old, people saw this inside of Colleen, the passion that she had for helping others. She was in preschool and she would look at her teacher and the teacher's aide in complete awe and amazement as they were able to open up these kids' minds to all that the universe had to offer. And she knew exactly then that that is what she wanted to do. She developed a love for teaching. We're talking about a 3-year-old. Now, once she became a teacher as an adult, she saw the power that she held. The feeling that it gave her to know that she could make such a big positive impact on her students and inspire them, that is what Colleen lived for. That's what kept her going. Now, unfortunately, the light that Colleen Ritzer was for so many other people would be put out far too soon. It was only Colleen's second year of teaching at Danvers High School. Danvers is about 15 miles from Lawrence, where Colleen is from in Massachusetts. And Colleen was very well liked by all of her students. She was the young, cool teacher. You know, she was just 24 years old. Students felt like she was the one teacher out of all of them that truly understood them. They said Colleen was always vibrant and happy and upbeat, positive. And many students said that she made them feel like they actually wanted to go to math class. How many young teens do you know that look forward to math class? Not many, but that was just the magic of Colleen Ritzer. And it was in one of these math classes that Colleen met Philip Chism.
From common student
He acted like an ordinary kid for his age.
to accused killer, 5 investigates.
Philip was a freshman in her algebra class. Now, as if being 14 wasn't hard enough, Philip was the new kid in town. He had just moved to Danvers, Massachusetts from Clarksville, Tennessee. And he was never, I don't want to say he was an outcast, but he was never the popular kid. Kids from his old school, Rossview Middle School back in Clarksville, Tennessee, they described him as being very quiet. He kept to himself. One kid did say antisocial.
He just seemed like quiet and like reserved, but he seemed normal other than that. He like made jokes still. If you talked to him, he would talk back to you, but he wouldn't really start conversations like often.
Someone else said that he was kind of out of it, whatever that means. But the one thing that Philip Chism was known for was actually something positive. It was soccer. He was a standout player, and everyone at the school, everyone in that town, they knew that. Which made it even more shocking when headlines showed that this young, promising soccer star had brutally assaulted and murdered his 24-year-old algebra teacher, Colleen Ritzer, on October 22nd, 2013. After numerous interviews with students at Danvers High School that combines with security footage from the school's newly installed security system, authorities were able to come up with this timeline of events from that day, October 22nd, 2013. Starts at 1:50 p.m. School ended, but Colleen Ritzer and a few other students remained in one of the classrooms up on the second level of the school. So they're on the second floor. One of those students was Philip Chism. He doesn't normally stay after class. He has soccer practice to get to, but Colleen took her job as an educator very seriously. She would often stay late and invest her own time into these kids because she wanted them to succeed. She wanted them to do well. So oftentimes she would hold study sessions after school. In this case, there was a math test coming up, and in class that day, she noticed Philip was kind of spaced out. He wasn't paying attention. He was supposed to be taking notes in his notebook, but instead she caught him doodling. He was drawing pictures, and this concerned her, again, because she genuinely cares about her students. So she goes up to Philip Chism, not to humiliate him in front of the rest of the students, but she kindly asked him to stay later to study with a few others so they can be as prepared as possible for the upcoming exam. Now, one of the other students that was there told police officers that at some point during this study session, Colleen was talking about China. Now, we don't know the context of this conversation, but she's talking about China, and then somehow Tennessee gets brought up. And Philip became visibly upset. We don't know why. We don't know what was said about Tennessee, but the student did say that once Colleen noticed Philip become very uncomfortable and upset, she quickly changed the subject. It totally was not done on purpose to make him feel any type of way. Now, Colleen knew, just like everyone else, that Philip did move to Danvers from Clarksville, Tennessee, but nobody really seemed to know why. What was his story? It turns out Philip's parents are going through a very messy and very stressful divorce, which, as you know, is tough on any kid. I don't care who you are. It's a tough situation. Philip's mom left his dad after a lot of fights, a lot of tears, a lot of infidelity, among other things. And because of this, Philip didn't really have a stable upbringing. He went from living with his parents to living with his mom's friends. They moved to Florida one time and then all the way back to Tennessee, where he oftentimes couldn't even stand to stay in his own home. So he would stay at a friend's house and then another friend's house, and he would just bounce around among his friends. According to court documents filed in a Tennessee court, Philip's parents split up when he was just 2 years old. And at the time, Philip's father agreed then to have restricted time with his son because of prior physical and emotional abuse, as well as alcohol abuse. So his dad wasn't really in the picture, but when he was, it wasn't a healthy situation to be in. Now, fast forward 12 years to 2013, and to see that his mom claimed to have still been dealing with that stressful situation shows just how toxic that relationship was. It took a lot for her to finally get her and Philip up out of Tennessee and to move to Danvers, Massachusetts, where they are now. Now, of course, no one at the time knew any of this information, why or how Philip ended up in Massachusetts, certainly not Colleen Ritzer, his math teacher, after she accidentally upset him just by talking about the state of Tennessee. Another student said they witnessed Philip acting really strange. He was sitting at his desk and he was talking to himself. I don't know what was said, but that is clearly a sign of someone who is not okay, if you ask me. Now, many thought this may have had something to do with Philip's actions afterwards. Like, was this motive for what he did? Colleen talking about Tennessee? Maybe this is what triggered him to attack and kill. However, authorities soon enough gathered evidence that the murder of Colleen Ritzer was definitely premeditated. School security cameras showed Philip Chism arriving at school that morning with more than just his usual backpack. He had several bags with him. You see him go to his locker and he's putting everything up in there where they stayed until after school. What was in these bags? He had extra clothes, he had a pair of gloves, a mask, and a box cutter. 2:54 p.m., October 22nd, 2013. The students that Colleen Ritzer was helping have wrapped up their extra study session after school. They've gone home, and Colleen Ritzer is seen exiting the classroom and walking towards the second floor women's restroom. This was a restroom that Colleen didn't normally use. This one was mainly for students, but since it was after school, there were no students around. Everyone had left for the day. Plus, the faculty one was in use. Why not? So Colleen goes into the women's restroom. After she heads on in, about a minute or so later, Philip Chism, who was the last student left in that study session, he follows her. You can see him initially step out of the classroom once Colleen has left, and he is in the hallway, and he's kind of just looking around to see if anyone else is in the hallway. There's no one there. Then it looks for a second like he's almost second guessing what he's about to do. He's having second thoughts. He stands around for a bit. He even pats his pocket to make sure he's got his weapon of choice, the box cutter, before ultimately deciding that yes, he's going to go through with it, and there's nothing that can stop him. So he heads down the hallway. He follows Colleen to the women's restroom. At this point, he's pulled his hood up over his head. He's trying to block himself from the camera's view, or his face at least. And you can see him on camera putting on gloves. The box cutter he had in his pocket was one that was made of flimsy plastic, according to investigators. And someone had written on it. It said, Phil's first tool, don't cut your arm off. Now, some interpreted that as it being gifted to him. Others thought that by it being labeled his first tool, that maybe he was intending on having other future tools, presumably for future victims. So Phil goes into the women's restroom. We thankfully do not see what happens in there. But 11 minutes later, he was almost caught in the act. 11 minutes after he enters the bathroom, another female student who was still at the school opens up the bathroom door, but then she quickly turned around and she just walked out and left. Now, a lot of people thought it was because she saw a murder scene. She says it was because she saw someone standing at the sink with their pants down by their ankles, and she thought she had accidentally walked in on someone changing. She says she just saw a butt and she was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? So she leaves. She hurried off. Now, it's crazy to think that just a few more steps into that bathroom and she would have seen the bloodbath that was left behind. Not only did Colleen Ritzer's body show signs that she was sexually assaulted by her 14-year-old student, she was also strangled. Her throat was slit, and she was stabbed at least 16 times. It's now 3:07 p.m. Security cameras show Philip Chism leaving the bathroom. He still has his hood over his head, but then he goes outside to the parking lot. 2 minutes later, he comes back into the school, and he's got fresh clothes on. He's now wearing a clean white t-shirt. We see him thanks to these newly installed security cameras that he goes back to the classroom. And by this time, he's wearing a red hoodie. So I'm guessing he may have stopped at his locker on the way and got a new hoodie to throw over his head to try to hide from cameras. At 3:16 p.m., he returns to the bathroom that he murdered his teacher in. And now he's towing along behind him a recycling bin. You know, the ones that we put outside our house once a week to get emptied out. It's one of those. But this one belongs to the school, obviously. Now, the fact that Philip Chism was able to change so quickly, find a recycling bin so quickly, and have it to the bathroom so quickly, all of this says to me that this was definitely planned out beforehand. He knew where everything was. He knew the quickest route to get from point A to point B. At 3:22 p.m., Philip leaves the bathroom, and he's now wearing just a white t-shirt, and now he's got on a black ski mask. Probably because his hoodie got dirty getting Colleen's body into the recycling bin. Yes, he stuffed Colleen into the recycling bin. And now that I'm thinking about it, I do wonder if the reason he chose a red hoodie for this part of the crime was because maybe he hoped that if he did get blood on it, maybe no one would notice. And he probably learns that that was not the case rather quickly, so he had to ditch the hoodie. That is just my personal theory. So now Philip Chism is pulling the recycling bin. That thing cannot be light. He is dragging it along with his math teacher's body inside. He makes his way towards an elevator. Remember, this is all happening on the second floor of the school. So he makes his way with the recycling bin to an elevator. He gets down to the first floor, and then he makes his way outside of Danvers High School. He's dragging the bin along. He's rolling it, using all his strength. He even passes other faculty members who at this point have no idea whatsoever what is happening right under their nose. They have no clue that in just a few short hours, there would be a manhunt for a Danvers High School student in connection to one of their colleagues disappearing. Philip Chism eventually drags the bin all the way to a wooded area behind the school, where he proceeds to assault her with a wooden object found there in the woods. About a half an hour later, Philip returns to the school. Once again, he changes his clothes. He even stops by his locker. He goes by the scene of the crime one last time. Why? No clue. And then he leaves. But Philip didn't go home. And Philip didn't show up for soccer practice. And that's when everyone knew that something was definitely wrong. But they could never imagine the extent of what was actually wrong. That Philip Chism, a high school freshman, a 14-year-old boy, just raped and murdered his math teacher, Colleen Ritzer. A missing persons report was filed after Philip didn't return home that day at his usual time. Normally, he goes from school to soccer practice straight home. Once word got out that he was missing, people understandably grew worried. The high school soccer team, they even went out looking for him, very concerned for his well-being. They thought maybe he had been kidnapped. Maybe Philip was injured and he was left for dead somewhere. Philip probably needed their help, so they're out looking for him all over town. Now remember, Philip is a quiet, mostly keep to himself, nice young teenager. He couldn't possibly defend himself if there was a killer on the loose, right? Not knowing the scenario they had made up in their head and the person they were eager to save Philip from was actually Philip himself. Meanwhile, Philip Chism decides to hit the town. Can you guys believe this? He just committed a gruesome murder, and the only thing on his mind right now is going downtown. So he heads out, and then he realizes he's hungry. You know, he's had quite the day, so he stops to grab some fast food. Now, the fact that anyone who's just committed this heinous crime even has an appetite and can eat is just beyond me, but that's exactly what Philip Chism did. You know, he was walking for hours at this point. He's hungry, so he stops and grabs a bite to eat. And straight from there, he walks over to the Liberty Tree Mall AMC movie theater. And he actually buys a movie ticket. He decided he wanted to see Woody Allen's new film, Blue Jasmine, starring Alec Baldwin and Cate Blanchett. By the way, the theater is about 3 miles away from the school or so, just to give you some context here on how much walking Philip is doing. So he buys his movie ticket. He goes inside, cozies up in his seat after having murdered his math teacher, and he watches the movie. He ends up leaving the theater at around 6:15 p.m. Then Philip walks even further. He ends up at a store called BJ's Wholesale, and he was acting weird. He was seen crouching in the aisles. He saw security cameras, so he's dodging the view of those cameras, or at least he's trying to. It didn't work. Cameras still caught him sneaking around. He ended up stealing a scuba knife or a dive knife from the store, which is a really common tool that divers use to cut entangling fishing line. There's a lot of other uses for it too, none of which apply to Philip, by the way, but he needed some type of weapon, I guess. Was he planning to kill again? Who knows? During this time, Philip's mom is frantic. She is losing her mind looking for her son. She must have alerted the school to see if they knew anything about where he could have went. And when they didn't have any information to offer her, the high school principal, Sue Ambrazovich, sent out a mass email to all the staff informing them that Philip Chism, a freshman at Danvers High, was nowhere to be seen and that he was missing. Now, shortly after that, one of the fellow math teachers at Danvers High School let the principal know that she talked to Colleen Ritzer's parents, Tom and Peggy, and strangely enough, Colleen was also missing. And you know what was even more of a crazy coincidence? Philip Chism was in Colleen Ritzer's last class that day. So the principal and a few others, they go by the high school that night to look for Colleen, or to at least see if there was any clue as to where she could have gone. They found her car still parked in the parking lot. That's odd, they thought. And also a big hint that she probably did not walk out of that high school. So where was she? It was like she had just vanished into thin air, which we all know isn't possible. So what happened to Colleen Ritzer? Everyone had to know. Where did she go? Her father later said during the trial that it was a very odd feeling to look back to that night they went to the school looking for her, because he and the others went through the same doorways. They went down the same set of stairs as her killer, Philip Chism. Put yourself for a second in that position. That has got to be just the biggest feeling of unease, to know that there was a psychopath walking among everyone else, and then to be so close to your daughter's cold, lifeless body and to not even know it. And even worse, to not be able to do anything about it when you're so used to protecting this person. At 11:20 p.m., Colleen's parents officially reported her missing. Police tried to ping her cell phone. The last known ping was near a local middle school, which you and I know was not of any help to authorities. A little over an hour later, 12:30 in the morning, October 23rd now, 2013, an officer who was driving sees a young man walking on a dark highway outside of Danvers. This officer didn't know at first that it was the missing teen that everyone has been looking for, Philip Chism, but he had to stop because the conditions were just not safe for anyone to be out walking that late. It was pitch black. It was the middle of the night. Plus, he sees a young teen, like, why aren't you at home in bed on a school night? It seems very, very odd. So the officer stops and he does a routine safety stop, which calls for him to search Philip Chism. So he gives him a pat down and he feels something there in his pocket. Come to find out, it was the box cutter that he had used to murder his math teacher, Colleen Ritzer. Philip hadn't even thrown out the murder weapon. He was hanging on to this thing and it still had dried blood on it. So the officer questions him about the blood. Where did this blood come from? Philip Chism muttered two chilling words, in two words only. The girl, he said. Okay, that was enough for the officer. He took Philip down to the police station where they searched his backpack. And you know what else they found in Philip's bag? They found Colleen Ritzer's purse. He had all of her credit cards. He had her ID card and he had her teal underwear. He was keeping all of this, or at least he had planned to, as a trophy, is what prosecution called it. Something to remember his kill by. Oh, and remember that food and the movie ticket he bought? It was on Colleen's credit card. So then Philip had the audacity to lie to authorities when they questioned where all these belongings came from. They clearly were not his. And at first, Philip Chism said he found them. As if Philip just happened to stumble upon a missing woman's belongings. Please. So when police were not buying that lie, I mean, who would? Philip changed his story. Then he said that he had stolen these items from Colleen Ritzer's car. That's when police realized, okay, Philip's not budging. He's not going to tell the truth. We got to call someone who can hopefully get some information out of him. So they call his mom, Diana Chism, who comes down to the police station. Diana had a very interesting conversation with police. One second, she would be confident that by talking to him, she could get him to spill the truth and help them with this case. Then the next second, she seemed concerned about the trouble that her son could be in. She was very wishy-washy, going back and forth. But she did say something worth noting, though. Something very chilling. At one point, she told officers, quote, "I do know he's capable of snapping. My son could have snapped. He's capable of that. As a mom, you just see some signs." As for what signs she could have been talking about, there was one time in 7th grade, she says Philip smacked another kid in the face. So he did have violent tendencies. Diana also claims that her family had a history of mental illness, so maybe Philip just wasn't right in the head. They eventually got Philip to start talking, and when they asked him if he knew where Colleen Ritzer was, he replied, "She's buried in the woods." It's now 3 a.m. when officers go into the woods behind Danvers High School, and they discover Colleen Ritzer's lifeless, half-naked, cold body under a pile of leaves. They said it looked like her body had been staged, the way it was positioned. It was just completely brutalized. The wooden object that Philip assaulted her with had to be pulled from her body, and not too far away was a pair of blood-stained white gloves. They also found a handwritten note. It was written by the killer, Philip Chism. It had just 4 words scribbled onto it. "I hate you all." It was almost as if Philip knew that Colleen's body would be discovered, or like he wanted it to be discovered. Why else would he leave this note here? And who exactly was he referring to? He said, "I hate you all." Was he talking about the officers who found Colleen's body? Was he talking about the voices in his head that he later said told him to take Colleen's life? Who knows? After that, Philip Chism was arrested and he was indicted for the murder, aggravated rape, and armed robbery of 24-year-old Colleen Ritzer. People who knew Philip back in Tennessee, to say they were shocked would be an understatement. His former soccer coaches just could not believe what they were seeing and what they were hearing about this case. Like, yeah, Philip, he was a little, on the quiet side, but he was always polite. He was always respectful. He would always address everyone as sir or ma'am. He was always the nicest kid on the soccer team. So murder? That's a little out of character for him. Philip Chism was charged as an adult and he pled not guilty. Well, he clearly was. They had so much evidence mounted against Philip. The blood-soaked clothes that they showed the jury in court, as well as the white gloves he left behind. They had all this security footage. So Philip and his team, they tried their very best to convince the jury that he was insane. And to be honest, he might have been. Many people also wondered if he showed any signs of remorse during the trial. He did say that he regretted listening to the voices inside his head that told him to brutalize Colleen and kill her. I don't know if that counts as remorse. So is Philip Chism actually crazy? Like I mentioned before, mental illness did run in his family, and this was brought to light during this trial. Both his maternal grandmother and his aunt had a history of psychotic disorders, and the defense tried to use this in court. They claimed that because of genetics, this was most likely passed down to Philip and that he also suffered from psychosis. The defense also brought on experts to help with their case. Dr. Richard Dudley was one of the main ones. He was their expert psychiatrist. And he said, based on talking to Philip, that he could clearly see a lot of trauma-related symptoms in this kid, all stemming from Philip's childhood and his upbringing. There were things that he refused to talk about entirely because it was too traumatic for him. And there were things that he seemed very dissociative from his own childhood experiences. I guess this would explain his upset reaction back in the classroom on that fateful day when Colleen did nothing more than mention Tennessee. Now, although Dr. Dudley told the court Philip was clearly suffering from some kind of trauma, he was never able to pinpoint exactly what it came from. It was a really tough trial for the defense. Now, typically when someone claims insanity, most people tend to overlook that. They think it's just an excuse, that they have someone trying to get off the hook somehow for the crime that they committed. Now, the jurors, as well as the public, they were not buying this insanity story, especially when there was no proven or documented medical history on paper that showed that Philip had mental health issues. There was nothing. Philip Chism, a teenager being tried as an adult, also started a much larger conversation. Should he be held responsible and tried as an adult for things he did when he was a young teen at just 14 years old? Now, research shows that the portion of the brain that governs rational decision-making is not developed at all, not even close at 14 years old. It shows that it's not fully developed until someone is well into their 20s. Now, this is according to the National Institute of Mental Health. They say that the parts of the brain responsible for controlling impulses are among the last to mature. Now, obviously, as seen in Philip's case, he couldn't control his impulse when he murdered Colleen Ritzer. And control was something that he still struggled with even during this trial. His lawyers were constantly worried about his deteriorating mental state. And there was even an incident that was really scary for them where they had gone out for break one day. And after break was over, Philip refused to come back into the courtroom because he said he felt like he was going to just lose it. And quote, like he was going to explode. And he feared what he might do to someone in that courtroom if he were to go back in there. Regardless of all of this, because of the youthful offender statute that Massachusetts legislature passed in 1996, Philip Chism was automatically tried as an adult. Now it states that any juvenile offender 14 or older who was accused of homicide would be treated like an adult. And if that's the case, they could serve life in prison. Now, the jury for the murder trial of Colleen Ritzer was made up of 8 men and 4 women. After 7 hours of deliberation, it was clear that they rejected Philip's claim that he was insane. They found Philip Chism guilty of first-degree murder with both deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty. He was also hit with aggravated rape and armed robbery stemming from when he took all of her belongings, including her underwear. On February 26, 2016, Philip Chism learned his fate after committing these crimes.
The court will impose the mandatory life sentence for the murder of Colleen Ritzer and set a parole eligibility date of 25 years, the highest level our law allows. This court will impose a concurrent sentence of 40 years to 40 years and 1 day for the rape of Colleen Ritzer and a concurrent sentence of 40 years to 40 years and 1 day for the armed robbery.
He was sentenced to life in prison and would be eligible for parole after 40 years. So he will serve at least 40 years in prison. Philip, at the time of his sentencing, was 16 years old. Now, Colleen's family and friends were just so sick to their stomachs, especially seeing Philip while the verdict was being read. He had no emotion. He just stared straight ahead, looking off into space like he didn't even care. Colleen's family later joined the district attorney at a news conference, and it was really emotional. Many of them wore pink in honor of Colleen, as it was her favorite color.
One of Colleen's favorite quotes was, "There is something good in every day." To celebrate our love for her and in recognition of the many lives Colleen touched and continues to influence, despite the immense loss we are forced to endure, we will carry on and do our very best to find the good in every day.
Later that year, Colleen's parents, Tom and Peggy, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Danvers Public Schools, the school's cleaning company, and a company called Danisco Design Partnership of Boston. They're the ones that designed the school security system, which they say was flawed. Tom and Peggy said that the security system was not properly monitored, which it wasn't. They were absolutely right. During the trial, the school's then school resource officer testified that while the district had recently completed a $71 million renovation of the high school, by the way, you would think that much money invested into the school, there would be some kind of state-of-the-art surveillance system, but no. He testified that the computer software that was used was outdated, so they couldn't monitor the security cameras correctly. Tom and Peggy also said that the cleaning company was partly to blame because they were instructed to clean up all the blood that was left behind in the bathroom, tampering with evidence. So they did this, go into the bathroom, clean up a murder scene, like clearly something awful has happened here, and no call to the police was made. In 2022, the judge ruled that this wrongful death case will move forward and go to trial. Unfortunately, any other information about this lawsuit and case and upcoming trial is sealed. The judge ruled that it is to remain sealed until 2042. As for Philip Chism, his team is still working to get his sentence overturned. The latest appeal that they filed claims that jurors were not able to properly evaluate their insanity defense. And they say that violates Philip's rights to due process, and it also made the jury a little prejudiced against him. They say the jurors never really got the chance to consider the effects of adolescent brain development, which really came to light and was talked about after the trial. There was so much that was unknown, like the experts that they had who actually reviewed MRI scans of Philip's brain. They wanted to show the jury these MRI scans and compare them to teens that were a bit older so they can see the difference in development. But these experts were never given that chance. Dr. Richard Dudley, the expert I told you about earlier that said he saw signs of trauma in Philip, lawyers say that he was very limited in what he could say on the stand as well. He didn't get to talk about the voices that Philip said he heard in his head telling him to murder Colleen. He also didn't get to talk about Philip believing that he was a real life anime character. Yeah, this kid was just not, he was not right. A ruling on Philip's latest appeal has yet to be made. Today, Philip Chism is 24 years old and is still serving his sentence of 40 years to life behind bars at Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Shirley, Massachusetts. Colleen's family, rightfully so, hopes that he never gets released. And they've vowed to show up at every hearing Philip ever has for the rest of his life. Let me know in the comments, you guys, any thoughts you have about this extremely twisted case. As always, videos like this on Truly Unhinged are made with the utmost respect for the victim and their families. And these videos are for educational purposes only. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you like true crime content, please consider subscribing and give this video a thumbs up as I do upload new content every single Friday. And if you come across any other interesting or chilling cases that you'd like to see covered here on Truly Unhinged, please feel free to comment them down below.